Okay, we're back with Dr. Black here, and we're going to provide a little bit more orientation, and then we're going to get into the meat of Iverson's assault. So historically, around noon, so there's about a 2-hour difference from what time it is today than what time it was historically, Rhodes's division of Ewell's Corps is going to come down from our north to the area of Oak Hill, the area that we just saw in a bit. So what Daryl is going to offer now is a bit of orientation about the Union line off in the distance along Oak Ridge, some of the experiences of Rhodes' division prior to July the 1st, and then that in turn will get us back here on this ground to discuss Iverson's brigade.
Yeah, the situation is getting pretty desperate for the Union Army. They know where Rhodes is. They know where Early is. The troopers from Devon's cavalry had been picketing the area up towards Heidlersburg, where the two divisions had camped the night before, and there was an expectation that Early and Rhodes were going to come down from the Harrisburg Road area towards Gettysburg. Of course, Rhodes and Early are a little bit confused as to what Robert E. Lee's intention is. The orders that are sent to them while they're at Heidlersburg are a little bit contradictory. You go to Gettysburg or go to Cashtown. At one point, Ewell famously slams his hand on his leg and says, "I wish that General Lee could find a staff officer who could write a clear order." So there was a little bit of confusion in the ranks of the Confederate Army at the high command.
And maybe it's useful to pause here, and for us in the 21st century studying this through books and through tours, it's easy to kind of see where all the places fell into the battlefield. But historically, there's an immense amount of confusion. Things are happening in real time. There's a great deal of uncertainty clouding the vision of these men, and the situation is extraordinarily dire, of course, for the troops on the ground.
And remember that it's Ewell's Corps that had been the spearhead of the entire invasion to this point. And evidently Ewell kind of hatches this plan to move up the Cumberland Valley and then move out towards Wrightsville and try to capture Harrisburg. Very aggressive, and this is one of the things that people like to criticize Ewell for doing is not attacking at Culp's Hill in the afternoon, because he's not aggressive like Stonewall Jackson. But every bit of evidence from July 13th or from June 13th all the way up to July 1st points in a very different direction, that Ewell is very aggressive in the way that he's executing Lee's orders.
And that doesn't take into account the men themselves.
Right, the men themselves.
Extraordinarily exhausted from the hard marching they had to do the day of July 1st.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, Heidlersburg is about 8 and 9 miles away down the Harrisburg Road, and the day before that, Rhodes's men had been at Carlisle, where they had gotten incredibly drunk. They found a lot of alcohol in the town. Campbell Brown, one of Ewell's staff officers, says that he had never seen General Rhodes drunk the entire war. And at Carlisle, Rhodes gets evidently blind drunk, as do many other soldiers in Rhodes' division. One North Carolinian writes after the battle or long after the war, but says that the reason that we lost Gettysburg was because of the liquor. And you could imagine the hangovers that these guys have after having marched as much as they had in the middle part of June, and then in the increasingly warm and humid weather. Not hot, but warm. It's about 75 degrees, 78 degrees on July 1st, but it's overcast. It's very close, as one of the soldiers from Rhodes' division wrote. Very humid. Said that the march from Carlisle to Heidlersburg, and then from Heidlersburg to Gettysburg, were the 2 hottest marches of the war. So not incredibly hot weather, but maybe a little bit of dehydration from all the booze. Certainly the humidity wasn't making it easy, and also the rate of the pace of the march was pretty intense.
Very brisk. So, for both armies.
For both armies. I mean, the Union Army is marching like crazy in the middle part of June, literally marching the skin off the feet of the soldiers. And then the 5th and the 6th Corps have huge marches to make. So it's kind of commonplace to say the Civil War happened outside, but you also have to remember that the Civil War happened on dirt roads, macadamized roads, in hot weather, cold weather, in very difficult conditions for these men. So that whole sense of this intense experience that increased over the course of time to the combat, you need to add the whole notion of these incredibly difficult marches.
And that, of course, is the bulk of a soldier's experience. It's not actually combat, it's not actually battle, it's the experience of marching or the monotony of encampments.
I mean, if you look at the actions that we're describing today, the attack that Joe Davis's brigade makes is probably the longest period of extended combat that you're going to see over the course of the day with the things that we're looking at. This is about a 40-minute fight.
Yep.
The fight at the Barricade of Rails is about 40 minutes, start to finish. So they're very, very little snippets of terror that are a part of a much longer experience of disease and marching and incredible discomfort. So.
Well, let's use that as our segue to get us oriented on Oak Ridge.
We're standing on Oak Ridge. We're standing on McPherson's Ridge, looking back towards the east in the Oak Ridge area here, moving into Seminary Ridge just south of the Chambersburg Pike. We're right at the edge of where Davis's brigade had attacked earlier in the day. And what Rhodes's men do is they come up and they extend the line. Because the Union Army knew where these troops were, where these Confederates were, they were able to use those reserves that we talked about a while ago down at the seminary to extend their line. And the first is Herbert Baxter's brigade that marches up beyond Cutler's brigade, which is in the woods. There's a gap in the line over in this area, but Baxter extends the line out towards Oak Hill and is in position to meet Rhodes's division when they come along about 1:32 o'clock in the afternoon. Just a quick aside is on the other side of the hill here, on the back side of this ridge, are the plains of Gettysburg, where the 11th Corps is beginning to arrive to extend the line out towards Barlow's Knoll. That's a little bit beyond our scope, but we have to think about what's going on behind the line here. So,
and most importantly, it's the gap that's created between the 1st Corps and the 11th Corps.
Yeah, there's a very, very thin skirmish line that connects the bulk of the 11th Corps and the right wing of Baxter's brigade, and then Gabriel Paul's brigade. They're covering a lot of territory with the 45th New York, I believe the 64th Ohio's skirmish lines. Very, very thin. George Doles's brigade from Rhodes's division is going to be out there kind of hovering off towards the Cobean farm and threatening that position, and when Gordon's men come forward later on, they're going to be able to move quickly to take advantage of that gap and to drive the 11th Corps off. But that's on the other side of the ridge. But, you know, if you're back here in Baxter's brigade, you can see all of this. If you're in Rhodes's division, if you're up on Oak Hill, you can see everything. You can see all the way back on the plains of Gettysburg, all the way down to the Fairfield Road where the left wing of the 1st Corps is positioned. So one of the few times in the Civil War where you could see an entire army or see the two contending forces. And the guys in Rhodes's division make these comments. They say, we'd never been able to see a whole battle line before. And now they're standing up and they can see the entire first day's field in one take. But Baxter's men come into position. It's Pennsylvania and New York soldiers. There's a stone wall across the ridge that you can see where the monuments are, and there's a stone wall there, and Baxter's men lay down, they take their flags and they lay down, and they wait for the advance of Rhodes's division and Iverson's brigade. There's a first attack. One of the problems that Rhodes has is that his attacks are very discoordinated. O'Neill's Alabama brigade makes an attack down the ridge or pushed back fairly easily by Baxter's men, and then Alfred Iverson enters the scene.
So Iverson was a bit distrusted by his troops, having not been a North Carolinian. His military reputation was a bit uneven. Where we started our talk just a few minutes ago was on the south side of the Mummersburg Road, which is roughly where Iverson's brigade was positioned. And they're going to be first moving in this direction towards McPherson's Woods and then swinging, running roughly parallel to Oak Ridge. Now, earlier today, Daryl mentioned skirmishers several different times, and this, of course,
I did that on purpose.
Yes.
I wanted to set this up.
These are troops who are basically kind of probing, seeing if there's anything to their fore. Iverson's brigade does not have the advantage of skirmishers, which is the fault of the commander, of course. So they are essentially moving blindly across extraordinarily open terrain. Again, there's no skirmish line to tell them what's to their fore. They have very little comprehension exactly what's in front of them, which is going to make what follows all the more devastating. So let me return then to Leonidas Torrance. Torrance, again, is basically on the ground upon which we stand. We're not quite at real time, but I think it's one of the The remarkable things for a Civil War historian to return to these grounds, to have the letters and the words and the phrases of these soldiers kind of echoing in your mind as you're walking on this ground, it's extraordinarily powerful.
It is.
I think that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, I think so. I think that human connection is incredibly important, and this really makes it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to again rely a bit upon some primary source materials here to give the viewers a feel for what exactly these men were experiencing. And one Pennsylvania soldier is going to note, at the command, a sheet of flame and smoke burst from the wall, flaring full in the face of the advancing troops. These troops, of course, are the men of Iverson. Among those troops is Leonidas Torrance. Torrance had become great friends with W.J. O'Daniel. They were messmates. They were men who had cooked their meals together, men who had bedded together, men who had shared their resources, shared the miseries of these long marches.
And they're from the same communities, and this is something that's so often overlooked. These men were communities at war, and that's incredibly important to think about when you look at a situation like what happens here.
This is fundamentally important, as Daryl said. And the two men had pledged, basically, to help one another if a situation ever arose in which one was wounded or killed. And on this day, according to O'Daniel, Leonidas was shot, quote, between the eye and the ear and in the thigh. So he's shot in two places. O'Daniel then goes on in this letter to Sarah Ann, Leonidas Torrance's mother, saying, when he was shot, he was lying in a hollow in a very muddy place. All that were badly wounded and shot and killed were in the same hollow. The depression that we see to our fore is the ground that O'Daniel spoke of. Now O'Daniel, he had pledged to stay with Leonidas, but he himself is hit. He himself is forced to pull back from this extraordinarily untenable situation. But before he is going to leave, Leonidas gives him a testament, a pocket knife, and a pocketbook, and he says, deliver these to my mother, Sarah Ann. These are his last remaining artifacts of war, essentially. And Leonidas knows that his time is probably up. He has been mortally wounded. He doesn't die on the field here. O'Daniel's actually uncertain of his fate. He writes to Sarah Ann repeatedly after the battle saying, I don't know of Leonidas' fate. I was extraordinarily distraught to leave him, but I was forced to do so. And he's going to write his last letter to Sarah Ann on the 10th of August. And he says, I think he is not alive now. It hurts my feelings so that I hardly know what to write. You have no idea how bad I hated to leave Lon. You have no idea how bad I hated to leave Lon. And indeed, Lon languished for several days after the battle in an ad hoc field hospital, and he's eventually going to perish in early to mid-July 1863. One of the dozens and dozens of men who succumb to some poor tactical decisions by their commander, and again bear the brunt of that in this depression right to our fore. So the idea on this part of the field is to give you all some perspective from the ground, again a view from the ground, what the soldiers themselves had experienced, what they thought, what they felt, in order to kind of broaden our gaze of this battle through the lens of a microcosm.
Yeah, and that I think that this story of a man being wounded and being lost is important to consider, and especially those days between the time that he's wounded on July 1st and when he dies, and it's a chaotic environment on the battlefield. Yes. The evacuation of the wounded is a very difficult job. It's unclear, I think, that whether he's taken to a Union field hospital or if he's taken to a Confederate field hospital. We don't know, but that is an experience that is often overlooked when we think of the Battle of Gettysburg. If we turned and looked back behind us, back towards the Blue Ridge Mountains, and followed the roads along the ridges back that way, we would be passing through a number of field hospitals, division-level field hospitals, where these wounded men were evacuated to, and where many of these men died. There are thousands of these soldiers who were left behind in Gettysburg, who are left behind by the Confederate Army when they make their retreat. There is also a long wagon train that's organized to carry as many of the reasonably healthy men back to Virginia as possible. But Lee leaves several thousand men here. He leaves chaplains and he leaves surgeons here to help out. This is a massive humanitarian crisis in the most fundamental way. The town is overtaxed. As the armies move away, the number of surgeons who are able to attend to these men decline. Lee takes most of his surgeons, and so does Meade. And there is a serious dearth of surgeons for a short period, and they bring contract surgeons in from Philadelphia. But the entire hospital experience and the experience of men who were wounded in battle is something that we have to really think seriously about when we look at this battle.
And I think to use that idea to close then, as you're visiting these fields, I think the tendency is to look to the front, to look at the battle lines, to see where the troops were engaged. I would encourage our viewers to stop and turn around and think about the fields behind them.
Yeah.
What men were lying there? What did that scene look like? How do soldiers represent that? How do they comprehend that? How did that change them as men and as soldiers? And so on that note, we're going to close this segment before we head back over to the seminary, and Daryl will pick up with the day's action in the afternoon of July the 1st. Thank you.